everybody, and welcome back to the Ask the Unfaithful podcast. As always, I'm joined with my counterpart, hero, and Elvis fan, based upon the picture in the background, James Anir. How are you, my good brother?
I am very grateful to be here and, have the incredible life I have and the friends I have, and my beautiful wife and kids. So grateful would be the best way to describe how I am right now.
I think gratitude is probably one of the most important principles that has gotten me through so many chapters of my life. I was informed by one of my clients today I'm wearing a coral colored shirt. I thought it was pink, orange. I was informed that it's coral. I'm very proud of my coral shirt. So today we are going to tackle a conversation that could run on for hours because it is rich with content, rich with, I might say, even confusion,
Huh?
massive confusion, and even misinterpretation by so many coaches, clinicians, pastors, priests, rabbis, therapists. It's become a hot topic, and some people have made or written books about it. They've made reels on Instagram about it, and there's a lot of misinformation. The concept is, in our world that we live in, is intimacy avoidance. The question is it normal? Is it usual? And why are so many unfaithful partners intimacy avoidant? I guess it would be better to say they are seemingly intimacy avoidant. Am I right?
Yeah. So yes, you are. And intimacy avoidance and intimacy anorexia are the two terms that are used the most, right? What Sharon and I have developed is this sort of spectrum or continuum that intimacy, we call it the intimacy adversity spectrum, because it's not, intimacy avoidance is actually pretty big, right? And then intimacy anorexia is even bigger, right? Because it's exactly what it sounds like. You can compare it to the eating disorder, as in it's a compulsive avoidance, right?
Right.
Not necessarily a conscious one, elements of consciousness in there, but the avoidance, it really is the adversity. So there's this scale or spectrum that we can put it on, which I will post sort of on the video, either above or below us at some point, so that people can see what that is, and we can talk about it too. So yeah, it's really important to understand that it's not just this one giant thing, right? It comes in varying shades.
I think it's important because so many betrayed partners live with this. Am I the reason? I'm the reason. I've had so many coaching appointments and my heart is broken. I even had your beautiful wife, Sharon, come on my podcast and talk about, was it the betrayed's fault that the unfaithful cheated or had an affair or had an addiction? Because the betrayed takes on so much responsibility and in an unnecessarily accurate way. It just isn't true. It isn't right that they would take on that they were the reason or their weaknesses were the reason that their spouse cheated. But let's start with intimacy avoidance and then spill that over into what you call, which I think is a brilliant term, intimacy adversity.
Okay. So the spectrum is basically, well, let's start with healthy, right? So that's sort of a normal couples dynamics range, right? But they're relating, they're doing this. It's not like this, it's not like this, or they're relating, right? They can come together, relate, and this is what is often called interdependence. So, it's not that horrible term codependence, but which is more locked in like this, where you're locked into each other's behaviors and reactivity. It's really just, it's this beautiful intimacy where you can come together and be apart and yet still be connected, right? So that is healthy. So then I would say the next one on our spectrum is hesitance. So that's when a partner would feel some distance, right? Not necessarily a ton, just sort of a little bit of a gap here, but it's noticeable to them. Then there's resistance, which feel is a felt distance, right? It's not, again, it would be more like this far rather than way out here, but it feels like a distance or even a divide to an extent, right? Then we have avoidance, and avoidance, other than perhaps coming together sexually now and again, or having the some shared experiences that are meaningful because you're both present, but mostly it feels like you're roommates.
Yeah. And we call that disconnection,
Yes.
which is toxic as all get out.
Yeah, exactly. Disconnection, and there's really good reasons for it that we're going to get into. But I want to just finish the spectrum just so that people they're going to be able to see it. But then there's aversion, intimate
Mm,
aversion. So aversion is getting close to that compulsive avoidance, right? That and so that feels like your worlds apart. You can be in the same house. It's almost like back in the 50s and before, where people slept in separate bedrooms. Back in the
right.
1800s, they might have slept in the same bed, but before they were married, they had a board in the middle of the bed. Did you know that? So that they couldn't
Yeah.
actually touch each other, right? It's very that kind of a feeling. Then you get
Yeah.
the anorexia, which is sort of a first term that came along. Carnes was talking about sexual anorexia. Um, Doug Weiss and others, I'm assuming, but he was looking at but there's an intimacy anorexia. His definition, though, is that it's conscious, sort of a willful avoidance, if you will. I don't quite go there because if you think about the eating disorder, they kind of know, right, that there's a problem there, and they know what the problem is, and yet there are these unconscious drivers for it that feel so strong that they can't help that. Right.
And
So,
and
yeah,
I think that has to be said because so many betrayeds have a lack of awareness of the unconscious drivers within the unfaithful. And the unfaithful would do well to say, there's probably a lot of unconscious drivers in the life of the betrayed as well because of trauma.
sure. Yeah. And reinforce everybody. So I do want to say, uh, I mean, I don't know the numbers, but we're talking a very, very high percentage of just people in the world have some intimacy adversity issues. Typically, there's always going to be something that has driven current behaviors that comes from childhood. I mean, it's just unavoidable. We've talked about it in a couple of interviews with the unmet childhood needs and such. And that doesn't necessarily mean trauma, but
Right.
there very often is trauma. And so anorexia is this compulsive avoidance of intimacy and our connection. You know, one of the essential things in life is to feel like we belong, feel like we're connected, and that really links back to, am I acceptable? Right. So
Mm,
so you can think of somebody who has intimacy issues as having varying levels of feeling that they're acceptable or unacceptable in the world, or that they lacked it, and because of that, they don't deserve this connection. Right.
right.
When it comes to the intimacy anorexia, you're talking about somebody who is compulsively avoiding that because so you've got to think that that is trauma. That's really deep, right? Then the
Absolutely.
next level, now this is where there's willful stuff going on. There's conscious, it's conscious. It feels purposeful to the and possibly even malicious to the partner, right? And that is enmity. So ENMITY, enmity, so that because I may not have said it correctly. So enmity is that's where the consciousness is, and that on the spectrum here is in the deep red, right? That is that's beyond there because there is that really there's a meanness to it.
Yeah. So in looking at your website, I'm going to make it easy on you. You had described intimacy adversity in a loving or romantic relationship is the difficulty sharing intimacy with one's partner. Even more generally, it is the hesitancy to share any real part of oneself. And you had put in notes for me, it is usually unconscious withholding of intimacy from one's relationship partner and typically everybody else in that person's life.
Yes.
Why? Why? Why do we do this?
So,
Make it make sense, James. Make it make sense.
okay. So, why we do it. So typically, and I know everybody gets tired of hearing, it's your childhood, or what I like to say is Freud, who always says, "Well, if it's not one thing, it's your mother."
Right.
So it really, no, it really does come down to it's not always mom. Unfortunately, mom gets a lot of the focus there, and it is about childhood. So what happens is that somewhere we learn, those of us who are intimacy avoidant, and I am, so I actually well, I'm not anymore, but I actually fell into the avoidant part, even I think probably going into the anorexia part, right? So we learn in our formative years, so 0 to 12 are sort of the major years. 12 to 18 is where we find our ego identity. So all of that matters, right? 0 to 18. Then it gets reinforced. But the feeling, what happened is that the feeling states of being close or intimate or bonded, healthily bonded, or, where they required too much of us. They required, so any emotionality, right, or connective bids for connection were stomped on. They were made wrong. We were shamed for them. We were even bullied, belittled, potentially even punished. So that creates pain. And
So what you're saying is nobody just woke up one day and said, you know what sounds cool to be intimacy avoidant or intimacy anorexic or any of the spectrum. Nobody just woke up and said, this sounds like a lot of fun, right?
right, because why would anybody not want connection, right? Everybody, we're human beings. We're connective beings. We rely on that to survive, right? And everybody wants to be loved. Nobody wants to be isolated, really. I mean, we may convince ourselves of that, but because it's about safety. If we feel that we belong, if we feel that we're acceptable, and then we feel connected, we're part of our tribe, as it were, then what goes with that is a feeling of safety, that the world is safe and other people are safe. If it's the other way around, where we're disconnected, feelings aren't talked about, feelings are stomped on, you know, people are belittled or even ostracized. Guess what?
Or
And pain, human beings avoid pain like nobody's business. We don't like physical pain. We'll take medication for it immediately, right? Who likes that? And nobody likes to feel sad, ashamed, or deeply depressed or put down. Nobody likes that. Nobody can tolerate that kind of pain. And so what do we do as kids? Well, we come up with really simple things like, I'm going to avoid that kind of thing.
yeah.
Okay, if that's going to cause me pain, I'm not going to do that.
Is it safe to say it also, some things are caught, some things are taught. So at some level, the family dynamic could have at some level modeled for the anorexic or the avoidant. Well, this is just how families communicate. It's not healthy. It sure isn't paying off for their marriage, but is it safe to say that it can be a learned behavior or a caught behavior because we are products of the way our family raised us?
Without a doubt. So you bring up a really good point there, because we do learn that as well. We don't have to necessarily, we're not going to probably be conscious of things like, well, there's pain with that, right? That's, so we build the defense there. But also that learning, this is what families are, and how this is how we do or don't share feelings. And
Right.
that is normal. So that's normalized. So when then that person gets into a romantic love relationship, right? Um, and they marry and they partner, they want that connection, but they have no real idea how to do it. And there's fear involved with that. And then the partner who may have grown up differently is
Right.
going, what is going on here? This isn't what I was promised. This isn't what I expected. What is wrong? What's wrong with him or her? And then it goes into the what's wrong with me? Am I not good enough? Am I not loving enough? What am I missing? Which is, by the way, not where that needs to go. It's not, it's not about that.
Right. But then, and so here's where we're at the poker table of life and marriage, and I have to pull out the ace of spades. Our podcast is called Ask the Unfaithful. Then there's the entrance of infidelity, or the discovery of an addiction, or multiple affairs. And the betrayed says, am I not enough? I wasn't enough. I must have not been enough for them to go outside the marriage. We've covered that. Incidentally, they can find a ton of materials at Hope for Us. They can find a lot of information. They can find more podcasts from you and I on my podcast called Sam's Healing Podcast, where we talk about this at length. And for those of you that are watching or listening, I'm going to continue to implore you to like this post, to subscribe to our channel, and continue to help us do what we do. As you've probably seen from our previous episodes, we are passionate about this stuff. This stuff keeps us up at night and wakes us up early, because
Yes.
if if we didn't have somebody that reached back in time to save us, we would not be here right now. I am the product of my own choices, but I am the product of a few good men and women who decided to take a leap and invest their time and attention and gifting into me, as are you. So the ace of spades of infidelity comes. What does this spectrum, avoidance, enmity, anorexia, how does it feel for the partner? How does it for the betrayed partner, especially? Let's start with the betrayed. How does it feel for a betrayed? They might be sitting here going, I don't know. Maybe he or she just doesn't like to talk about their feelings. Maybe more. So what does it feel like to be on the other end of a male or a female avoidant or anorexic or spectrumic, if you will?
It can really feel like a divide, right? That you can't reach across. It's just too far. It just feels impossible because of this divide, this trench or whatever, the Continental Divide, if you will, right?
Yeah,
And so um, you might try a bunch of different tactics to get that person to engage more on this level. Um, and then trying to please person one day and then maybe even just taking a step back hoping that they'll step towards you, or um, maybe even getting to a place where you feel like you have to be indifferent,
yeah,
right, and sort of go numb about it. But the difference there is, the edges are kind of fraying and such, but the difference there is, if it's real indifference, then the love is gone.
right.
The want, the desire to try to connect is gone. Most indifference is the kind of whatever, I'm just not going to, but you can feel the anger in that, the dismay in that. And that means there's still an investment, right? So what do they feel? They might thoughts and feelings of why isn't this person who I thought they were? What were all of these dreams of what our marriage was supposed to be about gone? Were they ever real? Was the person that my partner presented themselves to be when we were courting really who they are? And then the personal question, am I that unlovable? Did I do something wrong, and such, which is a really sad place to go. So you did ask about how can somebody have multiple affairs, right? So that kind of flies in the face of, well, if they're intimacy avoidant, why would they do that? Well, it's
Exactly. And let's take a pause and honor the betrayeds that might be listening or watching. Because if you're a betrayed, I want you to hear this, because James and I both care for a very large caseload of betrayed men and betrayed women. It can feel humiliating, degrading. It can feel absolutely at the pinnacle of abandonment for our spouse or partner to say, I had a connection with them that I've never had before. They just got me. We clicked. I felt what I've never felt before. Or we just had such a connection. And the betrayed sits here going, we had that. Or maybe they even might say, you know what, he's right. We never did have that. I guess the betrayed can feel so like they were dropped out of a plane at 50,000 feet, no parachute, and just like their skin is coming off their body with abandonment and trauma. But it doesn't mean, and you're going to solve this, not me. I'm just going to listen and take.
I hope
It
so.
doesn't mean that they don't love their spouse or partner, which can make you have an aneurysm of, what do you mean, Sam? That's BS, Sam. That can't be true. But you believe it to be true, that it doesn't mean that they don't love their partner, right?
Dude, you just dropped me in it.
This is what you get paid the big bucks for,
Yeah,
buddy.
right. Yeah, let me see if I can explain this. So this is, other having affairs, having emotional affairs, right? It doesn't have to be sexual, but there's always an element of emotion that goes into a sexual affair. And I know people are going to go, what? But there's either it's romantic or there are emotional needs being met that somebody's unconscious of, right? So those
Right.
childhood needs, which is really key here. The idea of, okay, I can cheat and still love my wife is actually real, and we've discussed that in one of our interviews, I think, on Sam's Healing podcast. Um, the the thing is that these emotional affairs are really, they're cheap. They're a cheap validation or a cheap uh, feeling of control or power. They're fantasy. They're not.
Right.
There's no reality there, and so of course it feels really good, right? Because there's oxytocin, which is the connection hormone, flying around. There's dopamine flying around, and there's no reality. There's no, hey, here's real life, and here's this the actual person who has all of their wonderful stuff and all of the stuff that they carry too. Because guess what? Affair partners, emotional affair partners, or sexual affair partners, the baggage is not seen,
Right.
right? And by either one of them. So there's no reality as to the human being that they're with. And so, the problem there, of course, is you have to, if you love somebody, you love the whole human being. You love them with everything, all of their great stuff and all of their not so great stuff, right? And the problem there is that most people who are unaware of their avoidance or who have these affairs, have this issue that we'll talk about in another podcast about, why do I love my partner, right? Is it
Right.
about who that person is or what they do for me? So another reason, Sam, is that they're so scared. I'm talking about the intimacy averse person. They're so scared of sharing themselves because of the childhood stuff that we talked about before. They're unconscious of it, of course. But if you can assume, just for the moment, as a partner of somebody who is intimacy averse, that they actually do love you, that they actually don't want to hurt you. This is why you kind of have to suspend your disbelief for a minute, right? Imagine the level of fear about sharing who they are, about being really vulnerable that they must be experiencing to not connect with the person that they love.
So it sounds like the avoidant is terrified of rejection, terrified of if they really knew the real me, they wouldn't like me. Is that fair?
It's fair. Absolutely. That's a nice plain English way of putting it. Thank you.
So then why don't they show it? Because I can hear a betrayed go, well, what the hell? Why don't they show it or tell us? Or why don't they do something about it, Sam?
That fear is so much that it'll appear like they don't, like they're not doing any, they may be aware of the problem because you've made them aware, right? And you would think, oh, okay, I've made them aware. Why aren't they taking these steps towards me? Well, it may appear like they aren't doing anything about the problem. They are aware. Now they're experiencing, because they're aware of it, they're experiencing even more shame that they can't do it, that they're so,
Yeah.
and it is that abject fear. Think of your worst phobia, right? Heights, spiders,
Snakes,
okay?
snakes.
Right. And having that right there. What was that show, Fear Factor? You know,
Yeah.
having to do that. And that's how somebody with an intimacy issue feels. It's one of their greatest fears. And it seems so strange, but it's because of their childhood experience that it is just the most dangerous place. It threatened their survival, their existence as a child. Because if you think about it, a child relies on their family to survive. And when their
Mm.
family says, oh, no, 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 there's no feeling here. You're in trouble if you do the feeling, right? Or you're going to be bullied or hurt, or there's going to be pain around that connection. Then, why wouldn't it be an absolute deep fear bordering on phobia? So it doesn't mean that that person's actively and willfully withholding that intimacy.
I think that makes a lot of sense that they're not willfully, actively trying to withhold from the betrayed or even punish the betrayed. I'm sure the betrayed they would line up to say, yes, it feels like punishment. It feels like retaliatory. It feels like retribution to me for my failures. But there's what another therapist that we know talks about the bottom of the iceberg versus the tip of the iceberg. The tip of the iceberg is these avoidant, this enmity, this uncomfortability, this resistance. But it sounds like the bottom of the iceberg is unmet childhood needs, childhood or even teenage trauma that they've experienced, or like their old friend Sam, maybe they opened up at one time in their life. Maybe they were vulnerable to men, in this case, men, and they were absolutely abandoned and left for dead. And maybe they've made a commitment and said, never again, I'll never trust anybody. I'll never give anybody the tools to hurt me like that again. What can that guy, what can that woman do that has said, I'll never trust anybody like that again? How can they repair that? Because part of them instinctively knows I'd really love to have connections like that. I'd really love to have somebody super close, but I don't trust anybody ever again because of how these people devastated me.
So you have to get an awareness of that, right? And so they may not be aware of that. They may be aware that, man, I don't like that person, or that person is, I don't want anything to do with them. But to get the awareness of what that person really did to them emotionally, right? So typically, even if it happens in adulthood, if it hits you that hard, it happened at some point in childhood. It may have been compound things that
Sure.
aren't as big and or memorable, but typically there's going to be a history of it, of a pattern of that. So I think becoming aware, which undoubtedly the person is aware that they have an intimacy problem because partner will have brought that up, right?
Yeah.
and then learning that under the layers of that fear, that they really do want connection, but they're finding, and this is really key, they're finding safety in disconnection. We,
Mm,
as human beings, we really should be finding connection and connection and safety in connection. Safety comes from belonging and acceptance, right? Instead, that person learned to find safety in disconnection or distance. So one of the things that they have to gain that understanding first before they can start making the approach. And part of that is, they're going to learn, don't trust, don't feel, don't talk, don't connect,
hmm
and start doing that with the person that they're safe with, which is likely their partner and a therapist or a coach, because you can practice it. And they can learn about why they're blocking themselves from being intimate because they want it, right? But then they block,
Right.
and that's really confusing too. Why am I doing that? It's very frustrating. I went through that. Then looking at what are my immediate defensive thoughts or things that I say. Well, I don't need that, or it's just too much to deal with. I just can't handle that. And then learning why it's so scary. Um, and then really also learning to express what they really mean. So rather than, hey, that's too much to deal with, like I'm having trouble with the emotions that are coming up when we start talking about this. I don't know how to handle them. Please be patient with me, because frankly, I've learned that I'm actually really scared that they could hurt me, that I could be hurt.
Yeah, that's
Um,
great.
so that is not something that we just say right here and boom, somebody gets it. Right? That's a lot of work, and it might take quite a bit of time, which a partner has already extended themselves a lot in terms of patience and time. So
John Maxwell has a saying in a lot of his books. He says, the power is in the process. And at some level, there is a process that the unfaithful has to go through to be able to trust again and to learn, if they're willing, how to really break out of this. There's also a process to the betrayed and what he or she has to go through to heal and to be willing to trust again of their partner and to be able to be willing to even work on the relationship. They know, we all know it's a massive process. As we kind of land this plane a little bit today, because I think this is deep thought for both the unfaithful and the betrayed. You say that there is a cause for hope in all of this, and that there is deep within this, and this is why I love you and Sharon so well, because while you are pro-marriage in cases where you need to be, you will be pro-divorce if the marriage is unsalvageable, if the relationship can't be saved. But deep within everything that you guys do, there's always hope. And it's not positive, toxic positivity. It is not a put your head in the sand and just everything's going to be all right. No, it ain't that. It isn't Grammy saying, hey, it's all just going to be fine. But there's always hope in everything that you do. So maybe take a couple of minutes before we say goodbye and talk about where the instances of hope actually lie in this.
I think there's a lot of hope in knowing that, just looking at the two of us even is helpful in saying, okay, even people who have been completely intimacy adverse, so not enmity, but certainly I was in the anorexic and heavily avoidant piece, right? So if that guy can learn the things that I just talked about, then my partner can do that too. If that guy can learn about um, his own, deep sense of being unacceptable, of not belonging, that true connection is not something in my world and not something I'll ever have, the fear, the anguish, the self-shaming about it. If that guy can, or those guys can overcome that and become really capable of true intimacy, um, then there's hope there. So that's one thing. The other thing to remember is that we all have a higher truth, right? Our higher self, which is
Right.
really who we are as a whole person, right? And so we're born as a whole person, and then we learn all these things that separate us from our whole person, and we end up out here, right? And what's happening is we learn all these beliefs and behaviors about ourselves that separate us from who we truly are because our needs need to be met. So one of those things is, well, I'm not going to be intimate because my needs aren't going to get met, right?
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
but then we're outside of our integrity because this in that whole piece is when we're in our integrity. So if there's that higher truth and that person is willing to do the work to figure out who they are, what that truth of themselves is, the beautiful thing is it's already inside them. Then we can have hope that, wow, they can be that person that they kind of sold us on in courting.
Hmm.
Because that's a very real way to know, who am I? You want to know who you are? It's who you presented while you were courting, right? That's your truth. Doesn't mean that you don't have all these beliefs and behaviors that are dissonant, that aren't true, they're distorted, they're not who you are, that you learned and to survive in this world, put the mask on, right? But you can't
Right.
mask off. And the other part of that is we grow in relationship, right? If I isolate myself on an island, I'm not going to be able to see my own stuff. The world is a mirror. It's a gift to us to be able to see what our stuff is, and relationships in particular show it
Right.
very clearly. So if we can grab onto that, then we can grow ourselves, and that makes us more emotionally available, and we can connect with our partner in the we-ness, right? Um, and it's okay to be scared. That's another thing. It's okay to be scared. You embrace that because there's an anxiety that goes with growth that is a positive anxiety. Not all anxiety is bad. So we have to be able to discern, wow, am I enhancing myself? And that still will cause anxiety because we don't know what that feels like. So it's new ground.
Right.
Or am I diminishing myself or hurting myself? That will cause anxiety because I'm separating myself from who I am. Well, they just need help getting there.
I think I love how you ended. You need help getting there. For those of you that are watching and listening, I venture to say if you are tuning in to this podcast, you need help getting there. Where is there? Man, there is a healthy and healed you, and potentially a healthy and healed relationship or marriage. If James or I can help you, you can reach out to our email address, which is asktheunfaithful@gmail.com. I want to encourage you that are watching and listening to like this post on YouTube or whatever vehicle you're using. We hope that you'll subscribe to our channel, Ask the Unfaithful. Regardless of where you're at today, regardless of maybe you are scared out of your mind that your unfaithful partner is on the spectrum of the intimacy avoidance or enmity or what have you. Maybe you're an unfaithful and you think, there is no hope for me. I'll never change. I'm giving up hope of ever changing. I would implore you, as would James, to say, perhaps there is a better way, and perhaps you still have hope. If I can help, if James can help, reach out to us. We'd love to support you. We'd love to hear from you. We always love to hear comments. We answer our own email because we don't have anybody else to do it. No, I'm just kidding. But we do answer our own email. We usually can get back to you within 24 to 48 hours. And James, as always, I can't thank you enough for the wisdom, but not just the wisdom, but the heart. And that's what continues to impress me and encourage me, that you and Sharon continue to have a heart of hope, continue to have a heart of courage and bravery, because this stuff takes bravery, right?
Oh, it truly does. I mean, make no mistake about it. For the unfaithful out there, there's a reason that we're unfaithful. And really, this part is at the base of it. It's not the sexual part. It's this intimacy adversity spectrum that really, really pushes this. So I really, it takes bravery, it takes courage. And you know what? It's worth it. You can do it, and it is worth it.
As we say goodbye, be brave today and keep being brave. We'll see you next time.